Welcome, my dear students of class 11 to this English class with me, your tutor Atsinyo Sekose. Today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic, that is, why can't a woman be more like a man? You will find it on page 56. It is chapter 6. Now this is an excerpt, we can say, which is taken originally from a play written by George Bernard Shaw. And you would find that it is titled as Pygmalion, but in our text we would be discussing it as this topic, that is, why can't a woman be more like a man? Now, in order to understand this lesson better, we need to first of all take a look at the context of this play and then get an understanding of the characters as well. I'm sure you are now very familiar with lessons under a drama section, so we would not be discussing the details of the drama and such things, but today we are going to, first of all, take a brief look at the author's background. So for that, you would have to refer to your page 60, and there you would find a little bit about George Bernard Shaw. And he was born in 1856 to 1950. He was an Irish playwright and a Nobel laureate. And if you also are curious enough to find out more about this lesson, I would suggest you also look up for a very popular musical play that is titled as My Fair Lady, which is also, if you care to know, it's one of my favorite movies. And if you watch this, you would be able to understand the context of this lesson much better. But for now, we would, in a very brief way, discuss what is this whole play all about, because we need that understanding to understand our lesson and our text here. So in the original work, that is Pygmalion, you would find that the characters are very interesting. One of the character is one of the main character, in fact, is Professor Higgins. Now, he is a phonetician and he studied phonetics, and he's very dedicated in that study. And he was going to meet another person, that is Colonel Pickering. I'll write it here. So these two people are supposed to meet. Now, Colonel Pickering is also very much interested in the study of language. So he has written, or he was studying the Indian language. And so Professor Higgins was very curious to meet this fellow, and they have made such an arrangement to meet. Now, at that point of time, we also get introduced to the heroine, we can say, that is Eliza Doolittle. So now, we find these characters outside a theater, and it was raining. Everybody was waiting for the rain to stop, at the same time trying to get a carriage home. So the setting is at around the time of 1950s. In fact, prior to that, that is in the 19th century, that we can put it in that way roughly. So here, Eliza Doolittle is a flower girl. You might want to note that down. What do we mean when we say flower girl? A flower girl is a girl who sells flowers in the street. So at that point of time, Professor Higgins accidentally knocked over all her flowers, and she was not able to sell the flowers. So at that point of time, Professor Higgins, in a very smug manner, we can also say, gave her a lot of money to pay for that. Now, in the meantime, he also criticized Eliza Doolittle's way of speaking. Why? Because she uses Cockney accent. So now, remember, Professor Higgins is a phonetician, and we find that he was very much disgusted with the way Eliza Doolittle was speaking. So now we are coming to the context here. At that point of time, Cockney here is the common English language that people use, and that is specifically referred to the lower class people, whereas the upper high class people, they speak proper English. So there is that distinction that we find in the way we speak, even in society. So you might want to keep that noted, because that is one of the main reference that we would find in our text here. So that is what we have here. And in fact, Professor Higgins, when he met Colonel Pickering, he also boasted that he can teach someone like Eliza Doolittle, who has a very bad accent, who has a very bad way of speaking or using the language English, that he can train her in such a way that in a few a month's time, she would be able to pass off as a upper class lady who is able to speak proper English. So when Eliza Doolittle heard that, she went home and she started to take it seriously, and she decided to pay Professor Higgins in order to get that tuition. Let's put it in that way. So now she came over to look up for Professor Higgins and asked him to give him lessons. Now, at that point of time, Professor Higgins was not serious about that. He was just simply boasting. That is also one of the characteristic traits that we would find in Professor Higgins. But Colonel Pickering was also his guest at that point of time, and he pointed out that yes, you did make such a bet, and that he is supposed to pick up or keep his words. So reluctantly, he took in Eliza Doolittle and started training her to speak proper English. So all these things, the plot, in fact, or the main thing here is that it is about training Eliza Doolittle to become a proper lady who can speak well and pass off and fool people that she's from the upper class or higher class. So that was the scenario here. But again, we need to understand here that from what our lesson is, from where our lesson is picked up from is from the scene where Professor Higgins and even Colonel Pickering were very much part of the education of Eliza Doolittle here. She started to get trained, but in that process of learning, Professor Higgins ill-treated Eliza Doolittle a lot. In what kind of manner? He would shout at her, he would let her go hungry for hours if she's not able to speak correctly. And she was also humiliated in so many ways, in the sense that the kind of treatment that Professor Higgins gives to Eliza Doolittle is that she was being treated as a common girl. Now, he would call her as gutter snipe, someone who comes from total impoverished society, or insulting her from the point of view that she is from a lower class section, or sometimes call her as a squash cabbage, someone who can never be learned, or someone who does not have a mind to learn. So in that kind of way, he ill-treated her a lot. But taking the case of Colonel Pickering, you would find that at least Colonel Pickering, to a certain extent, he treats her in such a way that he treats her in the manner of a lady. So in the education of Eliza Doolittle, you would find that she's learned more from Colonel Pickering. Now, taking the scenario here, both of them, they took Eliza Doolittle to test her whether she is able to carry out or learn her lessons, and they took her to her mother's party, and horse racing, in fact. And what happened here is that she was able to use the language, English language, properly as taught. But what happened is that she was not able to blend into the social etiquettes or social context here. So that was the main problem. So in that scenario, in that case, Colonel Pickering was more helpful than Professor Higgins, because the kind of treatment that she was given was being treated as a common girl all her life. And then even after the training, even though she is able to speak well, even though she is able to speak proper English, she was still seen as an outsider. So what happened is that from that incident, we also learned here that even though Eliza Doolittle is able to speak well, she would never be able to blend into the upper class or higher class here. So what makes an education effective? That is also the question here. It is not just about learning a language, but it is also about understanding the context and the human perspective that we need to address here. So now, what happened after that? They trained her again on those social etiquettes, and one fine day they took her out to the Queen's Ball, and what happened is that everyone was taken aback. In fact, everyone was very impressed with Eliza Doolittle. She was not only beautiful, but she was also able to carry herself like a proper lady, speak properly, speak correctly, and so on. So even some people went to the extent of saying that she must have been a princess or of royal family, of royal blood. So that was the extent of the success here. But what happened after the ball is over? Now, after the ball is over, Colonel Pickering was congratulating Professor Higgins, saying that you have succeeded in your plan. You have trained this untrainable young lady, or in fact, untrainable young common girl to pass off and fool everybody as someone who has royal blood. So see, raising her status up to that high upper class here. But the problem here is that Eliza Doolittle, she can never fit into the higher society because she does not have the means, even though she can speak well. Now, that is the problem here, and even though she goes back and sells flowers with such a nice English, let's put it in that way, she would never be again accepted within that common community that she belonged to. So that was the dilemma that Eliza Doolittle finds herself in. And even though they were able to manage to succeed in that manner, the human part, the emotions of Eliza Doolittle was completely left out. And these two people were just simply congratulating each other and talking about the success of that party. How even some wannabe, we can put it in that way, wannabe phoneticians were also saying, were so impressed with Eliza Doolittle. In fact, a student of Professor Higgins even misunderstood that Eliza Doolittle has such kind of a royal blood lineage. So that is what we find here. That was the extent of their success, but they failed to see the perspective of Eliza Doolittle. So what happened to her? What happened is that she returned all those fancy clothes that she wore, and then she went out of the house of Professor Higgins. At that point of time, Professor Higgins was not able to understand what is wrong with Eliza Doolittle, and he is shouting at Colonel Pickering, trying to make sense of a woman, and that is when we come to the famous line here, why can't a woman be more like a man? So we would be continuing with in fact, pick up the lesson from there on. So that is the context. I want you to keep noted that Colonel Pickering, in fact, Professor Higgins was a very insensitive person. Also, he is a confirmed bachelor, and that means that he does not want to get married, and he does not understand the companionship of a woman or the operations of women, in fact. So that is what we have here. So keeping that noted, let's come to the text here. You might also want to note this down, that George Bernard Shaw, that is the writer or the author, he is one of the main, in fact, defender of women's rights, or we can also say he's a defender. He is also brought out to light. He had also brought out to light the differences between the gender. At the same time, he has also addressed the issues of that context. In that kind of a society, remember we are talking about around the time of 19th century here, and in that 19th century, even women were still fighting for the right to vote, and that women were being seen as a typical stereotyped gender who are expected to be very docile and kind and do as the male gender said, and so on. So George Bernard Shaw, he, using Professor Higgins as a character or as his mouthpiece, is also trying to criticize the society at that point of time. And in fact, if we think about it, even in this present age, we are still addressing such kind of issues. So you might also want to, after this lesson is over, you might also want to think about what are the gender issues that we are still facing today. Now, very quickly, we would take a look at the opening scene here. I'll read it out. I hope you would follow your text. Why can't a woman be more like a man? Why can't a woman be more like a man? Men are so honest, so thoroughly square, eternally noble, historically fair, who, when you win, will always give your back a pat. Why can't a woman be like that? So see, the context here is that after Eliza Doolittle ran away, Professor Higgins was not able to understand why she ran away after such a grand success. And here, why is that women do not act more like a man? That is what he's asking Colonel Pickering here. And his view of men is that men are so honest, they are so honest, they are very noble, and they are very square. In other words, they are very fair in their dealings. You might also want to mark historically fair here. Now, what does it mean here? And it is very ironic. Why ironic? Irony is, I'm sure you are aware now, a poetic device that is used to bring out contrast, or we can also say to criticize, ridicule, using sarcasm and so on. So it is, remember, Professor Higgins is the mouthpiece of Bernard Shaw, who is a defender of women, and using how ridiculous Professor Higgins was uttering, using that context here, he is also criticizing how men sees women. So in this context here, it is very ironic. And also another point that is very ironic here is that you would find that we have already learned Professor Higgins' treatment of Eliza Doolittle. And I'm sure you will be able to understand whether that was fair on his part or not. And yet, here is Professor Higgins saying that men are historically fair. Since time immemorial, or from the past to the present, men are known to be very fair in their dealings, whereas he himself as a person was not being fair at all. So that is the irony that we find here. Who, when you win, will always give your back a pat. Now, the context gets more distorted here. Now, it was considered to be a grand success to pass off and to fool everybody, even the queen, to the extent of the queen, to fool everybody in that ball that Eliza Doolittle belonged to a very high upper class family or bloodline. And yet, Eliza Doolittle was not happy. They were congratulating each other, the two male here, they were congratulating each other. And he expected Eliza Doolittle to be as excited as he was, whereas it was, remember, it was seen only as a bet that was completed and was successful. In other words, he saw Eliza Doolittle only as more like a guinea pig, an experiment that was successful, and instead of looking at her or understanding her from the perspective of a human being. So here, the text gets more distorted. The more he uttered about why can't a woman be more like man, it becomes more ridiculous. Now, the next lines, why does everyone do what the others do? Can't a woman learn to use her head? Why do they do everything their mothers do? Why don't they grow up? Well, like their father instead. Why can't a woman take after a man? So that was his frustrations, that was his confusions with the fact that Eliza Doolittle ran away. And he goes on asking, why is it that women never think? Why is it that women do not grow up more like their father? In other words, here he is comparing the gender, that females should be more like a man or male here. And why can't a woman learn to use her head? You know, we have this stereotyped impression that women hardly do critical thinking and that they cannot do logical thinking, and that is usually left up to the man in a very patriarchal society and in this kind of a context here. So the same thing is being reflected, and this is the very thing that Bernard Shaw is trying to criticize through Professor Higgins. And that's why we have here, you might want to keep this noted, stereotyped view of women that is found in the opinions of Professor Higgins. Why can't they grow up more like their father is also an interesting question. Why? Because women are expected to behave like a woman, and we have a set roles for women to follow in the society. I'm sure you are well aware of that. And so this question is very interesting. It is also very interesting to the readers or to the audience here, because that was the kind of stereotyped role set for women. And here, Shaw, or the author, is addressing that very question here. Why can't a man take after a man? Men are so pleasant, so easy to please. Whenever you are with them, you're always at ease. Would you be slighted if I didn't speak for hours? So that is the question. Would you get really mad if I don't talk to you for hours? We again stereotyped men into thinking that they do not talk much, they are men of few words, whereas ladies, women, they talk too much and so on. And yet, if you look at this entire dialogue, it is more to do with the dialogues of Professor Higgins. So again, here is the irony. He also talks a lot, and in fact, he's even shouting at, in a very exasperated manner, he's even shouting at Colonel Pickering. And in the next class, we would continue with what he has to say more on this matter. And on that note, we would be winding up today's class. Thank you all very much for joining me.